Hello, and welcome back to the Garden of Grace devotion. My name is Pastor Katie, and I'm one of the pastors at Trinity Lutheran Church in Lilburn, Georgia. And today I have with me my dear friend, Joy Summerville Johnson. Joy serves at Redeemer Pres. She is the worship leader. We used to serve alongside each other, and we had a wonderful, meaningful time. So I invited Joy today to share with us some thoughts here in the garden devotion. And this week, our focus will be on finding joy at the well. I shared with Joy that last Sunday I offered a sermon on the woman at the well. And I just fell in love with this story in a way that I hadn't before. And as I was sharing with you before we started recording, Joy, I was reminded as I thought about this woman and Jesus and all their differences about some of the conversations you and I have had recently about what it's like to meet people at the well, to look across in front of us and think, wow, the person before me is quite different and I am quite different from them. So now what? And I know that you are a person that people come to and you engage in these types of conversations on the regular. So I would love to know what kind of thoughts you have to share about what it's like to find joy at the well.
Yeah, well, it's like we talked about, it's a great question because one of the first things I think of is our willingness to even sit down and have conversations. I think there has to be first that openness to do so in order for any of the beauty that can come out of that conversation to actually happen.
Mhm.
So from that perspective, I just look at it and say finding joy at the well means being open to there being joy at the well. And that means that there's an understanding that whether we foresee it or not, that there can be joy found at that well. It takes us slowing down and stopping and sitting and having that conversation first and being open to it. So that's the first thing I think about when I think about it.
Yes, being open. And how many things get in the way of that? And how like joy is not one of the things I think of sometimes when I find myself in a conversation with somebody who I'm very different from, like in any kind of significant way. Often the focus is on like muddling through or learning more about them, but being open to finding joy, that's something else altogether.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that um when we think about difficulty, we don't think about joy. When we think about differences, we don't typically think of joy. I think people live in a space where it's like, hey, um, that's why people and honestly, it's a big issue that we have even within Christianity is putting ourselves in places where people are very much like us, where they believe the same things as us,
Yes.
where there's the absence of difference, and therefore we know that there will be no contention, right?
Right.
And so, thinking of going into a place where people are very different than us, going into Samaria, going to
Mhm.
a well with a woman when culturally this is not supposed to happen,
Mhm.
understanding that even in that place you can find joy, is something that we're very clearly taught, and yet we as Christians still shy away from it. And I think again that's why I
Yes.
started with the openness to doing it, because sometimes we're not open, sometimes because of the general discomfort, but also because we see differentness as not a good thing, which I tend to believe just the opposite. And I
Mhm.
think it's easier for me to see it, and I'm being honest, easier for me to see it when people have, they eat different foods and they look differently. Oh, that's easy. But when they start talking about things like politics and little differences in what they believe in their, particular denomination, well, that gets harder. So um so I think that's like I said, seeing people and seeing the beauty of the differences in cultures, that part is easy. But as soon as you start getting into the beliefs that people have, that gets troublesome.
Do they wear
That
red or
makes
blue?
no sense.
Do they? Yes, all the
Yeah,
things.
yeah. So,
What does their
mhm,
voting ticket look like? What is their
exactly.
all of it?
Yep,
All
all
of
of
it.
that. All of that.
And you're telling me that I can find joy in some of those conversations. You're telling me
Yes.
that.
You know, that's that part of that is the beauty of it, because if you love just on the surface, it's not really love. So you can
Mm,
be in a body of people that everybody feels like we feel the same way because we choose not to talk about difficult things, right? But that means that we never get past the surface. And that
right.
means I can't truly know you. So if I can't truly know you, I can't truly love you. Like from the perspective, I can love you like that grand, overarching love. That's fine.
Yeah.
But to know you personally and to have a sense of intimacy with you, it takes breaking past that. And so that's the joy that can be found. And I think we see that at the well. We see kind of Jesus scratching at the surface and going deeper and deeper and deeper. So all of a sudden she walks away knowing Jesus because he knows her. Right. And but that takes getting past the difficult pieces that are just like we're very different. And we don't believe the same. And I don't feel like I'm worthy or this or that. Like there's a lot that's packed into humanity that makes it difficult for us to sit down and have conversations. So
Well, but love is easy when loving people in a way that's patient and kind and gentle and generous. Like that's easy if they're just like me and then it's easy.
of
So
course.
that's good, right? Comfortable, cozy, like that sweater you like to put on and just, but
Yeah,
I feel like you're telling me that we're called out of that.
I think we are. I think
Yeah.
that's the only place that collective joy can be found is when
Mm.
you understand that people are very different and that there's beauty in those differences. And you may not agree with everything they say, but in order for you to truly know them, in order for you to be able to um, add insight to their life and for them to be able to add insight into your life, it takes again that openness to saying it may not be easy, but where we end up is not going to be where we start. And if we only decide to stick where we started, we won't see the joy at the end, which is this beautiful relationship that had to start from scratching the surface. Right. It wasn't just, oh, that's nice polished glass. Oh, we could keep just shining it. Oh, look at that. We
So
can buff it
pretty.
out. Yeah, that's so pretty. No, it's like, let's scratch it. Let's see what it does. Oh, I see it. I see that. Now, not so pretty for the moment, but when you get past that, again, when you get past that and you can restore it. And I think that's the thing is that difficult conversations require being in them and then restoring that sense of normalcy. And it's in that restoration that you find the joy, is that we got to scratch past this. We got to make it ugly for a minute, but we got to restore it. And now I get to see, okay, I do love you. I could say that all day to people. I love you. I love you. You give people hugs at church. I love you. I don't know you worth a dog. Oh, I don't know you, but
I don't
I
know
love
anything about you.
you because you're here with me on Sunday morning.
And there is something to that, right? There is
Right.
this love that we're called into this community of love, right? But then there's, boy, I seen your business and I love
Right.
you.
Right.
Because you know
Exactly.
what? God knows everything about me and loves me. And that means
Right.
that in your mess, I love you. And in your blessings, I love you. You
Right.
know, all of that.
Yeah. And then people being willing to share their messiness with you is it also opens us up to being willing to share our messiness with them. And that level of vulnerability is what actually, again, causes that the creation of true intimacy and true look. We know each other because we're not afraid to have a difficult conversation. We're not afraid to expose ourselves. We're not afraid to ask our opinions on this is what I think. What do you think about that? Right? Because otherwise you can just say what a person wants to hear. I know you'll agree with me. So I'm just going to say this. No, when you love somebody enough to say to them, I'm going to share something with you, and I know it's not popular opinion. What do you think about that? and you can walk through that and talk through it, then that says that there's actually a relationship. And if there's nothing else Christianity teaches us, is that we are called to be relational. That's
Mhm.
not a surface thing. That's not
No.
a, just, hey, just when they say welcome everybody at church, you just stand up. Hi. Like, that's not relationship. We're called to get into the trenches with one another and say, yes, I'm called to hold you accountable to some level, but you're also called to hold me accountable. But that means we have to actually be sharing those things. And if we're not, there's no level of accountability. I can't judge you just based on what you look like or what I heard through the grapevine, or God forbid what you posted on Facebook. You know, like, hey, and I have that conversation with people a lot. It's just like, don't respond on Facebook. If you know that person and you say you love them, then you pick up the phone and you
Yeah.
say, let's have coffee, because that's
Right.
relationship. Like, no problem is ever going to be solved over Facebook. Sorry, social media.
Today's installment of Garden of Grace Devotion is not sponsored by Facebook. So, words of encouragement and things like that can happen on there too, but it can also be a place to like light a match and toss it. And then the next thing you know, from afar, all these words, all these words, all these words. When we're together, though, it's grounded in relationship. And then you can
Right,
hear the harder things.
right.
And I think that's part of why I fell so in love with this passage, because in no way was the woman shamed. And my prayer is that we can get to where at church and worship with each other, we can walk in with what we've got,
Mm-hmm.
that we don't have to grit our teeth and say, I'm doing great. How are you? But say, you know what? I'm feeling broken today.
Yeah,
I'm having a hard time. Because I think part of what feeds isolation is shame.
I
I
agree
mean,
with that.
that woman had the courage to come out of where she was to get water. Where do we need to have the courage to come out of
Mm.
living water, for healing
Yeah,
water,
yeah,
for the joy that
yeah.
we can find at the well?
For the joy we can find. I mean, it's interesting because you bring up the story and you ask, where do we find that? We also, again, as Christians, know that, the armor we possess, is in all of the things that we know about who Jesus is and who we are in him. And
Mhm.
so, where do we find it? We find it right where it's always been, right where we've always been told it is. But what we tend to do is we tend to lean on our humanity. And again, that match that you're talking about goes out into social media. And what's so damaging about it is not even just that, like, we noticed that the people of the town of Samaria didn't come to the well. The conversation happened at the well, and then it was taken back to the people. And so, if I want restoration, um, I've got to have a conversation with you first. Meaning, if we have differences that we need to work on, if you want to share something with me and you want to be vulnerable, I have to be willing and open enough to hear it, but I also have to be willing and open enough to share, because often people don't just, yeah, a lot of people like to, as they call it, vomit on the desk. That's great. Here's everything, for you, like, ugh. And you're just like, okay, but what really what really helps to solidify that is when people say, I haven't experienced what you've experienced, but let me tell you a little bit about my story too. Right. And in that sharing, when you come to an understanding of one another, then that is actually, to me, what starts a different kind of fire. That fire of I won't call it true love, but that fire of appreciation for our fellow humans that walk alongside of us, is that there's not one of us that is not in some way, shape, or form broken. And so when we are willing to listen, it also means being open to say, you know what, I also have thoughts on that. You don't just sit and listen. Like, I think that's the one thing that I find is that when people have conversations with me, I don't stay quiet and say, oh, that's really interesting what you think. I will share what I think about it as well, as biased as it may be because of my own perspective. Right? You don't walk in my shoes, I don't walk in yours, and yours is painted with one brush and mine is painted with a completely different one. Right? But I have to be willing to share that with you, and we have to be willing to together seek to find not necessarily a picture that suits both of us, but a representation of that, that we both can understand. And I think that's the seeking to understand things. And that to me is where the joy comes in, is because we as two people who vary greatly are willing to sit down and have a conversation that leads us to a level of understanding of one another at a deeper level. We don't love each other any less when we leave. We understand each other a whole lot more. And I think that's where, again, we're armed with all the tools to be able to do that. We just aren't open to doing it because it's not easy. But we're also
Scary.
told it's not, it's scary. It's scary. But that's the thing. We're also told that this walk is not going to be easy. And
Mhm.
yet, and still we're like, but I like it easy. So can we just keep it that
It's
way,
comfy.
please?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is nice.